All right, part 2 of the Communist Manifesto. Nope. The Manifesto of the Communist Party. Man. All right, so we're talking about the bourgeoisie. It seems like I don't have to use that word a lot more, since now we're talking about the proletarians and the communists. Right, in what relation do the communists stand to the proletarians as a whole? The communists do not form a separate party opposed to the other working class parties. They have no interests separate and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole. That is so weird, right? They're doing that immediately again, something that was bothering me yesterday, right? That they're defining the proletariat as with a vague arbitrary line somewhere on how much stuff you own, and the people that just owns the least amount of stuff. And they put them as a group, but that how much stuff they own, that's a very vague so far. But then they say, right, then they're talking about a political party and the interests of the political party, and they say the interests of the proletariat. It is kind of a dick move to say that you know what interests someone else, right? I can concede, like, if we make a charitable interpretation, we can say that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Something like that, and then we could derive interests from that, I suppose. But we're talking about a political party here, right? How to achieve these interests, right? Right, the proletariat is... I suppose that's why the communist is then, right? The Communist Party then, the only thing they care about is lifting up the proletariat to give them more power, right? That's the only thing the Communist Party cares about? Maybe that's what they're saying. Right, they do not set up any sectarian principles. Oh, right, that is what they're saying. They do not set up any sectarian principles of their own by which to shape and mold the proletariat movement. The proletarian movement? Right, the communists are distinguished from other working class parties by this only. 1. The national struggles of the proletarians of the different countries, they point out and bring to the front of the common interest of the entire proletariat, independently of all nationality. 2. In the various stages of development which the struggle of the working class against the bourgeoisie has to pass through, they always and everywhere represent the interest of the movement as a whole. Yeah, so if the communist parties, right, still follow this, I think that's very misguided, right? They see it as a struggle, and there is this tendency that really bores me, right, about tearing other people down, and that does not interest me, right? If it is about lifting the proletarians up, right, it's about the proletarians and the communists, right? Why does the bourgeoisie have to be here? They don't have to, right? We just need to create social structures for the proletariat. That was a little bit annoying. In the national struggles of the proletarians, the different countries, they point out and bring out the front of the common interests. Alright, so the communists is like a global thing, right? They don't care about individual... It's more of a centralized view. The communist is more abstract, while the working class parties are more hands-on. That's probably my understanding. Right. The communists, therefore, are on the one hand practically the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of every country. That section which pushes forward all others. Yeah, right, that's what they're saying, right? I wouldn't say advanced, I would say abstract, right? It's hands off, it's the least useful one, right? That's one way of looking at it. But it's the most centralized view of the thing, right? And I guess, right, when you're talking in these abstract like if when you're talking black and white philosophy, right? So when you're talking black and white philosophy, right, then you can be super resolute, right? We've been talking about that on this channel before, that there are different aspects to life, right? You can have black and white ethical statements of what you think is good and bad, right? That's your opinions and beliefs and what you want society to look like. But then on like the other end of some sort of spectrum, I don't know, but on the other side of some side of scale, you have your actual real life and your actual behavior, right? You might ethically be against torture, but if you would end up in a situation where someone has the knowledge of where the rest of your family is and hold their life, they have information that can save their lives, but they refuse to give you that information that you need. Right? That's not necessarily the same thing as the intellectual abstract ethics discussion, right? That's two completely different things. So I wouldn't call it advanced and resolute, I would just say it's more abstract. And you can have centralized common goals, right? That's what they do, they point out the common goals, the common interests. They point them out. They're not more advanced and resolute, it's just different. Right. On the other hand, theoretically, they have, over the great mass of the proletariat, the advantage of clearly understanding the line of march, the conditions, and the ultimate general results of the proletarian movement. Clearly understanding. I mean, I suppose, right, if we're taking a statistical view out of things, right, you have, right, the more data you have, the better understanding you can have. And since they take this top-down centralized view, they can't, like, the communists can look at that scale and take a longer, a different approach, right? They can look forward longer. Politically speaking, right? They can look at what will the world look like in 50 years. They have that possibility with this type of abstraction. Well, what you lack is what's gonna happen within the next year. Sure, pros and cons.
Just give me a fucking chance to breathe. I got a few questions of my own. You ain't dying, he is.
There we go. Alright, the immediate aim. Wait. I must have misunderstood something. I didn't think they had an immediate aim. Alright, let's keep going. The immediate aim of the communists is the same as that of all other proletarian parties: formation of the proletariat into a class, overthrow of the bourgeoisie supremacy, Conquest of political power by the proletariat. Oh, it's not immediate in time. It's just like this is our goals, right? These are the forefront goals. Right. This is like if we're just a one question party, this is our goal. That's an interesting goal. Right, the formation of the proletariat into a class, that's weird because they've pretty much said that that is already a thing, right? So what about the formation? That has already happened as far as my understanding of the text goes. Overthrow of the bourgeoisie supremacy. It's very hostile language, isn't it? Very combative language. I'm not at all for that. If it would be improve the quality of life of the proletariat, right? It's about the communist and the proletariat. It doesn't have to be about the bourgeoisie. Sorry. Conquest of political power by the proletariat. Yeah, there we go, right? That you can do. Conquest of political power by the proletariat. That makes a lot of sense to me, sure. And I'm all for that. This, not so much, right? Yeah. I think that's too hostile. And I think it's, yeah. It's terrible. It's combative. You create enemies, right? By having this, you create enemies. This one I didn't understand, but I don't see that making any enemies. But here we go. Conquest of political power by the proletariat, right? You don't create enemies here. It's just like people might have different political interests, but that doesn't necessarily make you into an enemy, right? They might become your enemy, but you are not necessarily their enemy, if that makes sense. Right? If you take this, overthrow the bourgeois supremacy, that is you creating an enemy. And I can see rhetorically why people do this, right? That has been done over and over and over again in the political spectrum, right? In the political, not spectrum, in the political sphere, in the political arena, right? Create an enemy and then fight said enemy. It's a good way to unite people. I don't like it, right? That is what the Nazis did. That is what the Americans has done lately, right? With the terrorist. That's a very vague enemy, right? But they united against the enemy and fought the terrorist. The war on drugs, right? You unite towards a common enemy. Right? And I think if you build and improve or change society based on animosity, that will necessarily lead to oppression. That will, like, if you build animosity into society, well, there you have it. You have a hostile society, and that's, I don't want that. I don't want a hostile society. I don't want enemies. I want cooperation and friends. Why not, like, we can figure out other enemies to fight, right? Time, death. Those are enemies we can unite against. Yeah, let's say death. That's a common enemy, right? We can all gather around. Do politics to fight death instead of fighting other people, right? Fighting other people, that's like, then you're a friend of death, right? Because in the end, if you're fighting other people, like, what is the extreme thing when you're fighting people, right? Where does that lead? Where does it lead in the end? Death. Not necessarily, right? But it can. That's the extreme end of that scale. Right. The theoretical conclusions of the communists are in no way based on ideas or principles that have been inverted discovered by this or that would-be universal reformer. I don't understand this bit. Alright. They merely express in general terms actual relations springing from an existing class struggle. That's just, they're making shit up here, right? That's from one point of view. This class struggle, they created, right? They invented it. Pretending that the class struggle is objectively real is... I reject that idea. Right? From a hysterical movement going on under our very eyes. Alright, that was a great video from Philosophy Tube yesterday about what's that? Social construction, right? This struggle is like, it's invented, definitely. It's you looking at something and deciding. Right, so this, I completely reject these two paragraphs. I haven't even finished the other. All right, the abolition of existing property relations is not at all a distinctive feature of communism. Oh, it's not. All right, they don't. It's not about property relations. It's just these things, and they claim that, oh, this is just objective reality, which is ugly rhetorics in my mind. Yeah, it's I've complained about that a lot, right? The ideas of good and evil or right and wrong when talking about morality or politics or ethics. All those are opinions. It's not springing from the existing class struggle. It's springing from your opinions. These are all opinions. And kind of fuck you for... Actually, not fuck you, right? It's not malicious, right? They didn't know any better. I mean, they believe what they're writing. It's just what they're writing. Right? They would have to answer to Hume's guillotine. And they haven't. No one have. Right? There is, so far, I have not seen any convincing argument against Hume's guillotine. Right? I've seen people just saying, well, it doesn't matter. And I disagree, right? That's my opinion. I disagree, therefore I disagree with this. I disagree with this rhetoric. Yeah. All property relations in the past have continually been subject to historical change consequent upon the change in historical conditions. Yeah, property relation change. I mean, stuff change. Here we go. The French Revolution, for example, abolished feudal property in favor of bourgeois property. Yeah, sure. The distinguishing feature of communism is not the abolition of property generally, but the abolition of bourgeois property. Alright, so I guess that in the modern way, we've talked about this before, the difference would be personal property and private property. And what they're talking about, bourgeois property, that would be something that is today considered private property rather than personal property. Like the company's ownage of the property instead of individual. Today, a person does not own a factory necessarily, right? It is an organization. But more modern bourgeois private property is the final and most complete expression of the system of producing and appropriating products that is based on class antagonisms, on the exploitation of the many by the few. Yeah, and I still disagree with this view completely, right? It's not class antagonism, it's the exploitation. Sure, I can agree that it is the exploitation of the many, but it's not by the few. It's the exploitation of the many by the many. Yeah, if we mass produce food and you eat, then you exploit the people who mass produce the food. Right? If we look at society today, right, who are the people who's eating the mass produced food, right? Usually the rich, the bourgeoisie, don't use the mass produced food. They have fancier, they eat the fancier food. The more expensive food is not the mass produced ones, right? Free range eggs are more expensive than the mass produced ones, right? In this sense, the theory of the communists may be summed up in the single sentence: abolition of private property. And there we are. Abolition of private property. Exactly. We, the communists, have been reproached with the desire of abolishing the right of personally acquiring property as the fruits of a man's own labor. Reproached with the desire of abolishing the right to personally acquiring property as the fruit of one man's labor, which property is alleged to be the groundwork of all personal freedom, activity, and independence. Wait, what? Property is alleged to be the groundwork of all personal freedom, activity, and independence? Wow. I disagree with that view on property. Property is owning stuff. Well, I suppose, right? What would this stuff be? Food, shelter, water, stuff. House, a home. A hammer to build a home. A fishing rod to do the fishing. I disagree with the ownership. Property is not necessarily for these things. Property is an abstract idea, right? And it's not necessary for personal freedom, activity, and independence. I think it's a very good property, is a very good idea for organization of humans. But it is an abstract idea, just like money, for example. And I think money is a good idea for organizing, right? We have just an abstract number, like an abstract piece of paper representing some value. It's all made up, right? Just it's a simplified. There are stuff in our current monetary system that I really don't like, but just the idea of money, the idea of property itself, I don't think that's a bad idea. I think it's helps out with organization. Yeah. Alright, hard-won, self-acquired, self-earned property. Do you mean the property of petty artisan and of the small peasant, form of property that is preceded the bourgeois form? There is no need to abolish that. The development of industry has to a great extent already destroyed it, and it's still destroying it daily. Yeah, that's the distinction they're making. It's just, yeah, abolish private property, but keep the personal one. The problem with this text, though, is that where do you draw the line? What is the difference between private and personal property? Right? From this text, right, nowadays it's easier. It's just, right, I would say it's probably just a big corporation cannot own property. Only people can. That would be the thing they would want to do, probably. But that's not the basis of the idea. The basis of the idea is just the richest people should not be allowed to own, right? Well, you're not... There's an upper... That's what they're saying, right? They want an upper limit of what a person can own. I'm actually not against private property, personally. I think it's a good idea for an organizational organization to be able to own something. I think a factory is helpful. And I would prefer an organization owning the factory rather than an individual. Because power corrupts, and an individual having the ownership and having all the say-so. Actually, it doesn't really matter. It's about what decisions should be allowed to be made, right? Maybe a person owning the factory is just fine as long as we have enough regulations and political rules and say over the thing, right? Right? Society politically does not have to own something to put restrictions on the usages of that thing. I would say, yeah, that's a separate question, yeah. So, right. Like, I'm allowed to own a hammer or a knife. Let's say I'm allowed to own a knife, but I'm not allowed to stab someone with said knife. Right? Saying that, oh, people get knives, people get stabbed by knife, and therefore we should abolish knives. Or the ownership of knives, like it should be illegal to own a knife. Or a pair of scissors. I think that's misguided, yeah. I think that's, again, trying to tear stuff down. Also, it's just, I don't know. The idea of property and the abstract idea of property is useful. It's so useful. Right. Or do you mean the modern bourgeois' private property? But does wage labor create any property for the laborer? Not a bit. If they get money, it does. Right? Because that's with the abstract thing, right? You own the money and then you use the money to buy and own something else. So it does. A bit. A tiny bit. But a bit nonetheless. It creates capital. Yeah, i.e. that kind of property which exploits wage labor and which cannot increase except upon conditions of begetting a new supply of wage labor for fresh exploitation. I mean, all ownership, right? If you take that kind of perspective that they're kind of doing, right? All property exploits wage labor, right? As long as you can trade something, right? If you own one thing and I own another thing and we trade it, I have just exploited your labor. Right? That's what trade is. And I wonder if they do want to eliminate trade. No, they don't want that because that is dumb. Who would say like, oh, trade? No, that's a dumb idea. I mean, then for humans, that is, right? Humans are a social species. We organize into groups and we cooperate. You do X, I do Y. You use my labor and I use your labor. Right? That's what cooperation looks like. If you look at it like, and you can say that type of, right? You can call it exploitation if you want to, right? But I disagree that it necessarily, like capital necessarily, exploits wage labor. It uses wage labor. And at that time, and nowadays as well, I think that the people that has the lowest wages don't get enough. I would agree with that. And they get more exploited, right? There's people that just own a lot of stuff and they don't do any, like, they don't do any, like, there are people that don't do any labor and has all the money. Well, not all the money, of course not all the money, but like... I don't know. Property in its present form is based on the antagonism of capital and wage labor. Let us examine both sides of this antagonism. Is it really antagonistic? I guess from a certain point of view I would have to concede, right? That I would say it's not necessarily, but I would say in social structures we do find this. And we find it over and over again. Right. To be a capitalist is to have not only a purely personal, but a social status in production. Yeah, it is the organization, right? It is not... Yeah, it's about me owning the factory that gives me a status in production. It's not just me owning the factory and using said factory. It's me owning all the laborers as well. Telling them what to do. Well, it's not even owning them, it's people being dependent on me. That's the social status, right? The wage laborers are dependent on the capitalist. And I would kind of agree that it should be a mutual dependency, right? It should not be an unfair balance between the two, right? I would say it's good that I mean, you cannot get rid of that dependency if you want mass production, which I do want. So you cannot get rid of, like, the organizer and the organized, right? It's difficult to get rid of that. But you can change the balance between the two. If you see the balance as being unfair, which I do at the moment, right? I see the balance being unfair at the moment. And I can be a broken record again and say, universal basic income! That's balancing it out in the other direction. Hello, Saitama SS4. How are you doing today? Nice to see you again. Right, capital is a collective product and only by the united action of many members. Nay, in the last resort, only by the united actions of all members of society can it be set in motion. Not all, but a vast majority, right? Right? Some people can reject this stuff. And they get fucked over because they are the lower minority, yeah. Saitama SS Forces, I was wondering if we're going to see some more PoE gameplay. Path of Exile? I will not play this next league, the upcoming league. Has it started? I don't think it's started yet. It starts... Does it start today? Yeah, no, I'm skipping this league because I spent a lot of Path of Exile the last league. But I'll probably come back the next, maybe. But it's gonna be a while, right? It's gonna be at least a few months before I play Path of Exile again. Yeah. So not in a long while, no. Well, not Path of Exile gameplay from me, anyway. Of course, I'm assuming you're fairly interested in Path of Exile gameplay, and of course there's a lot of Path of Exile gameplay on Twitch. And I enjoy looking at some Path of Exile gameplay, so I watch that from time to time. So I'll probably watch some personally myself from the new league. Yeah, instead of playing, I'll probably watch some of it just to see the mechanics and whatnot. Saitama SS4 says there's some ultimatum to enjoy before it ends. mean, one thing that I did not do in Ultimatum was trying to get that boss dude. I'd never fought the Ultimatum boss, but I don't really... It's something that I notice now, right? I played some bosses and I played the end game. My enjoyment of Path of Exile, it kind of ends right about when you start hitting those red maps. Yeah, I like the white and the yellow maps, but when you start getting to the red maps, that is where my enjoyment ends. I don't enjoy the boss parts of Path of Exile. I enjoy the farming, the mapping. Yeah, I enjoy mapping. And somewhat like I enjoy delving a little bit, and I can probably see myself sometime in the future playing around with them. With that other thing. Right. Yeah, not the bosses, but the slaying of the millions of enemies. They call them monsters, but so many of the enemies are just humans, right? Regular old humans that we call monsters while we kill them by the thousands. Yeah, so I'm happy that I got to Cirrus and just got to see him, even though he wrecked my ass. Well, I was terrible, but I have no desire to actually beat Cirrus anytime in the future. Right. I'm probably... I mean, I don't mind bosses overall, but in that type of gameplay, it's not for me, yeah. I like all the other bosses where it's just a little, the enemy is a little bit more difficult than the other enemies. And it's like an end to it. But still being able to kill them fairly quickly. Yeah, I like the stats bosses, not the mechanics bosses, if we put it that way. I mean, a few tiny mechanics is fine, but mechanics that kill you? No, well, mechanics where you have to move around a little bit. That's fine, yeah. Alright, capital is therefore not only personal, it is a social power. Yeah, I agree with that. So, actually, capital is not only money. Clout could be considered capital as well. Right? Social power, right? Like fame. Fame is social power, right? So you got goodwill, right? There's talk about that in companies having goodwill that they spend doing... They spend goodwill by doing stuff that people don't like. And they build up some more goodwill by doing stuff that people do like from a social perspective. That is not necessarily monetary. That's interesting. Alright. When, therefore, capital is converted into common property, into the property of all members of society, personal property is not thereby transformed into social property. Wait. Right. Capital is converted to common property. Alright, you purchase something. Into the property of all members of society, personal property is not thereby transformed into social property. Yeah, you can use money for social stuff, but you can also use money to just purchase a thing, right? Yeah, personal property is a thing, right? Okay. It is only the social character of the property that has changed. It loses its class character. Wait. Kinda don't understand this thing. Right, there is a status in the production, sure. And you gain social power, political power. People will listen to you, right? People would listen more to you, right? You gain ethos. That's in rhetorics, right? You gain authority by just through your power, right? And it's yeah. It's a positive feedback loop. Right? The social status, more people will listen to you, and if you know how to deal with it, right? You can turn fame into money, you can turn money into fame. Right? You can turn status into money, you can turn money into status. If you know what you're doing. And if you have enough of either, right? Yeah. So I would disagree. I would say that personal property can be transformed into social property. It's just that you have to have enough of it, right? But that kind of makes sense in the context of this text, right? Since what they're doing is, right, they were saying that everybody on this, like, you can own, like, from 0 to, like, infinite amount of money, right? And they're talking about the people that's in the closest to 0, right? They draw an arbitrary line here and look at everybody on that side of the line and call them the proletariat. And the line is a little bit fluid in the text, but it's still no one... Well, in some places they could have, but most people that when they define proletariat are not people that have enough money to turn it into social property, right? They just don't have enough of it. Right. It is only the social character of the property that has changed. It loses its class character. Yeah, I disagree, right? It's just not enough. That's what I would say, yeah. Let us now take wage labor. The average price of wage labor is the minimum wage. The average price? No. There is a minimum wage. Right? I.e. that quantum of the means of sustenance which is absolutely requisite to keep the laborer in bare existence as a laborer. Yeah. But bare existence is relative as well, right? Minimum wage today is probably very different from minimum wage at these times. Yeah, that changes with culture and time and what is considered minimum. What is considered bare existence. That definition has inflated, right, over time. Yeah, and it keeps inflating. That is something that is happening. Yeah. From my understanding, right? If you look at
something right, something everybody else in history done wrong.
What, like eat the food, drink the water, and breathe the air?
Assuming that Hans Rosling's statistics checks out, right? Right, the minimum wage globally is increasing. Assuming that is the case, and I would take like that their word for it, their reports on it. I would need. I'm open to criticisms against it, but for me, he has enough ethos, right? He has convinced me. All right. What, therefore, the wage laborer appropriates by means of his labor merely suffices to prolong and reproduce a bare existence. Sure, we by no means intend to abolish this personal appropriation of the product of a labor, an appropriation that is made for the maintenance and reproduction of human life, and that leaves no surplus wherewith to command the labor of others. Yeah. I mean, I would even say that, like, this minimum wage, that would be just minimum money, right? You wouldn't need to labor for it. That would be my future goal, right? Where you can just get the minimum bare existence. You just get that by nature of being a human in society. That's what I would want to see, yeah. All that we want to do is away with the miserable character of this appropriation, under which the laborer lives merely to increase capital and is allowed to live only in as far as the interests of the ruling class require it. All right. If you look at it as an unfair balance, then I agree, right? If there's an unfair balance, let's try to even the balance out, right? For the poorest people. Make the poorest people a little bit richer. Have that as a focus. I'm all for that, yeah, sure. In bourgeois society, living labor is but a means to increase accumulated labor. I don't see that as true. Not in modern days, anyways. I don't even think it was true back then, right? For some people, they might have these opinions, right? The objectivists would be one example of that, right? Where you dehumanize other people, right? You don't see them as humans. But I've heard a lot of bourgeois today. Well, I've seen on TV anyway, right? And I've seen, right? Bourgeois organization wanting to take care of their workers, right? Wanting to increase the quality of life of their wage laborers, yeah. In communist society, accumulated labor is but a means to widen, to enrich, to promote the existence of the laborer. Yeah, right? And that's... like, in society, that is happening, right? I think that is... yeah, the black and white and the hostility again is... I don't know about that. In bourgeois society, therefore, the past dominates the present. What? In communist society, the present dominates the past. What? What the fuck are you talking about? In bourgeois society, capitalism is independent and has individuality, while the living person is dependent and has no individuality. The living person is dependent and has individuality, right? Even in communist society, the individual, the living person, is dependent on the rest of the people, right? That is... if you build social structures, like I was saying with the corporation, you will build dependencies. That is unavoidable. And this, right, the present dominates the past? What the fuck are you talking about? I don't understand. I don't understand at all. Like, the present dominates the past? Are we at 1984 here? Do we want to dominate the past and rewrite history? Is that what you're looking for? I don't understand. I don't understand the relevancy. We're all, like, in my understanding of the world, we're all slaves to what happened in the past, right? Causality, I would call it. Right, and abolition of this state of things is called the bourgeois' abolition of individuality and freedom. And rightly so. Abolition of individuality and freedom? Are there people actually working for this? The abolition of individuality and freedom? That's interesting, because what I've heard, that's what the communist gets Oh, right. Oh, it is what they're talking about. I was thinking that that's people saying that that's a bad thing about communism. abolition of individuality and freedom. And they say rightly so. The abolition of bourgeois individuality, bourgeois independence, and bourgeois freedom is undoubtedly aimed at. Right, that doesn't impress me like at all, right? These are people. Your goal is to remove the freedom and independence and individuality of people. That's oppression right there. That's like literally oppression. You're looking forward to oppress people. I don't see any other way to interpret this. Undoubtedly aimed at. Yeah. By freedom is meant under the present bourgeois conditions of production, free trade, free selling and buying. Oh, right, they want regulation. I misunderstood. All right. What about individuality, right? If they talk about freedom, they just want to regulate. They want to regulate business. And I mean, I'm for that. A society with rules. I would prefer a society with rules. Doesn't everyone? Right? So it's kind of a... It feels like fancy rhetoric. It's kind of implying that the bourgeois don't want any rules. Don't want any regulation. And I guess there is a balance, right? How much regulation a person wants regarding how little regulation they want. So, I don't know. I mean, I've heard the argument, right? Free trade. In free trade, we cannot allow monopolies. So we need to regulate. To have a free trade, we need regulation. I've heard that argument before, right? And that is, from my understanding, that's a capitalist or a bourgeois argument, right? Right, so. But if selling and buying disappears, free selling and buying disappears also. Wait, are you serious? No, they want to make selling and buying disappear. Is that... Wait. This talk about free selling and buying and the other brave words of our bourgeois about freedom in general have a meaning. If and only in contrast with restricted selling and buying, with the fettered traders of the Middle Ages, but have no meaning when opposed to the communistic abolition of buying and selling of the bourgeois conditions of productions, and of the bourgeoisie itself. And here starts the problem with the vague definitions, right? Here it becomes a problem, right? Because you just... Again, it's just an arbitrary line, right? It's metaphysically, it doesn't work out, right? Because what you're trying to, right? Oh, no. No, what they are doing, they just want restrictions. They just want regulation. Right? It's the language becomes weird because they talk about abolition, right? They're talking about that, but it kind of seems like it's restricted, right? Regulation, right? It's only the bourgeois conditions. It's only certain conditions they want to change. Not the actual abolition. The language becomes super fucking confusing to me, yeah. You are horrified at our intending to do away with private property. But in your existing... But in your existing society, private property is always done away with for 9/10 of the population. Its existence for the few is solely due to its non-existence in the hand of those 9/10. Yeah, black and white and hostile language for an imbalance, right? That is, when they present the so-called problems, it's always an imbalance problem, right? It's always, that's what I see, an imbalance problem, like unbalanced problem, right? The 9/10ths, like, it's the same today, right? The same arguments, right? The richest own, like the top 1% own 99%. That's what they say anyway. And that's a bit unbalanced. Right, you reproach us, therefore, with intending to do away with a form of property, the necessary conditions for whose existence is the non-existence of any property for the immense majority of society. Oh man. But that's the thing, right? It's not, and that's where the problem, the mistake of the communist here, I think, is that with a form of property, it's not a different form of property. It's like, it's derived like philosophically and metaphysically, the form of property, the abstract idea of property is the same, right? And you cannot, like, the form of property, it's not two different forms of property. It's just some people having more of it and some people having less of it, right? Maybe that's a misunderstanding on my part. Maybe it is different forms of properties, different types of property. I don't know. I don't think so though, right? Since it's all translated into money, right? And the wage laborer gets their money. And the factory owner gets their money. And the money is used, it's the same form, right? In one word, you reproach us with intending to do away with your property. Precisely so, that is just what we intend. Alright. They just... yeah, the language goes back and forth, right? It's vague and confusing. But from a charitable interpretation, even though they use words like abolition, that's not what they're trying to do. They're just trying to do the Robin Hood thing, right? Take from the rich, give to the poor. In a structural way. They want to change the structure of society to be rebalanced in that way. Where the poor today will be richer tomorrow, and the richer today will be poorer tomorrow. From a charitable interpretation. It's difficult to do that interpretation because sometimes that does not at all seem like the goal. Right. From the moment when labor can no longer be converted into capital, money or rent or a social power capable of being monopolized, i.e., from the moment when individual property can no longer be transformed into bourgeois property, into capital, from that moment you say individuality vanishes. Wait, who says this? I think individuality, right? Well, right. You must therefore confess by individual you mean no other person than the bourgeois, than the middle class owner of property. This person must indeed be swept out of the way and made impossible. I also feel that it's like a failure of imagination, right? Well, I suppose, right? That they're talking about getting rid of the middle class, and I suppose one way to get rid of the middle class, if everyone is bourgeois, then no one is bourgeois, and that's one way to do away with it. Communism deprives no man of the power to appropriate the products of society. All that it does is to deprive him of the power to subjugate the labor of others by means of such appropriation. Subjugate? The power to subjugate? That's very interesting, because I don't see that happening. Right? As long as we have the availability to appropriate products of society, right? Like money, you can use that power, or you can use that, you can trade, right? And that is the full idea of subjugation, right? You can tell someone else to do something and give them something for it, right? The subjugation only, right. The subjugation happens with food. Alright, so modern communism should be universal basic income, right? That's modern communism, right? Because that is taking away the power to subjugate. Right. Nowadays, I need to stay at my job if I want to keep paying my rent and food. Universal basic income would deal with that from a communist perspective, right? It would do away with the power to subjugate. But Alright, I can understand that, perhaps, yeah. It has been objective that upon the abolition of private property, all work will cease and universal laziness will overtake us. I mean, that is the same thing, right, as universal basic income? I think, yeah, that's the problem, right? Calling it the abolition of private property. I wonder what they imagine, right? It's so far removed from the society that they lived in at that time and the society we live at today, like the abolition of private property. What would that even look like? It's so far removed and there would be so many problems with it, right? Instead of taking steps towards these goals, right? Taking steps towards these goals makes a lot of sense. I like taking steps towards these goals. I don't think this is a step towards that. I think that abolition of private property would lead to chaos, anarchy. And what does chaos and anarchy lead to? Yeah, it leads to warlording. It leads to feudalism. Yeah. That is, like, if you... Right? Yeah, you just create new... what's that called? Yeah, you just create new feudal lords. You just go back to the way it used to be. According to this, bourgeois society ought long ago to have gone to the dogs through their sheer idleness. Oh, right, I forgot to point out this. This is just dumb. Yeah, right. Laziness will overtake us. That just... Right, even if we go back to feudalism, laziness will not overtake us. That's... Right, and they argue this, right? If laziness would have overtaken us, it would have done that in the past. Our species would have died out. If that was an actual danger of our species... Yeah. According to this, bourgeois society ought long ago have gone to the dogs with sheer idleness. Exactly. Same argument is dumb in regards to universal basic income, right? Sheer idleness would have gone away with us, right? I would argue, though, that not laziness will overtake us, but super disruptiveness, right? where people don't know what to do and we're not organized to do the things that we need as the species, right? If you make big sweeping changes, then we will end up in situations where people don't know what to do rather than being lazy. That's why making these sweeps, like abolition of private property, is too big. Right. For those of its members who work acquire nothing, and those who acquire nothing would do no work. Yeah, and they've already answered this. That is not what they're looking for. Right. The whole of this objection is but another expression of the tautology, that there can no longer be any wage laborers when there is no longer any capital. This is confusing. What is the definition of capital here? Right. If you don't have anything to pay someone with, then how would you pay them, right? I don't think that's a tautology, but it seems like it's rather a misunderstanding of what this means, what capital means, right? It means something to the bourgeois and it means something to the communist. It has different definitions. And I don't know what to think here. Capital, social and economical power. All objections urged against the communistic mode of producing and appropriating material products have in the same way been urged against the communistic mode of producing and appropriating intellectual products. Intellectual products? Gross. Just as the bourgeois, the disappearance of class property is the disappearance of production itself, so the disappearance of class culture is to him identical with the disappearance of all culture. Right. That culture, the loss of which he laments, is for the enormous majority a mere training to act as a machine. Yeah, I like that. I made a similar argument against the Neo-Luddites, right? Disappearance of all culture, that's just dumb, right? That won't happen. Right, but don't wrangle with us so long as you apply to our intended abolition of bourgeois property the standard of your bourgeois notions of freedom, culture, laws, etc. Your very ideas are but the outgrowth of the conditions of your bourgeois production and bourgeois property, just as your jurisprudence is but the will of your class made into law for all, a will whose essential character and direction are determined by the economical conditions of existence of your class. What was this part called again? The proletarians and the communists. And yet we end up in the same situation as the previous text. It's just, oh, fuck you bourgeois, you're so terrible, and you just want to hurt us. That's what you want to do. You just want to hurt everybody, right? You just want to exploit and make us suffer. And that's... No. The selfish misconception that induces you to transform into eternal laws of nature and of reason, the social forms springing from your present mode of production and form of property, historical relations that rise and disappear in the progress of production, this misconception you share with every ruling class that has preceded you. What you see clearly in the case of ancient property, what you admit is the case of feudal property, you are, of course, forbidden to admit the case of your own bourgeois form of property. abolition of the family, even the most radical flare-up at this infamous proposal of the communists. Yeah, so far the text hasn't described the differences between the different types of property, the different forms of property, so I have to reject this because I don't understand it. Well, I don't have to reject it, but I don't understand it, and from what I do understand, right? Property, just owning a thing. Everybody thinks that owning a thing, right? Me owning this thing, that everybody in the past have thought about that one way. What is the other way? I've missed that. Hopefully I'll get some understanding to... It is not the difference between private and personal property, right? I misunderstood that, because private and personal property is something different today. On what foundation is the present family, the bourgeois family, based? On capital, on private gain? No. I reject that. Family is based on two people marrying and humping. Blood ties. In its completely developed form, this family exists only among the bourgeois. But this state of things finds its complement in the practical absence of the family among the proletarians and the public prostitution. Alright, so it's more like the modern equivalence of your chosen family, right? I've heard a lot of talk about that, your chosen family, right? You have your blood family and you have your chosen family. That's your close friends and whatnot. And I would probably reject that only exists within the bourgeois. I guess that chosen family is a matter of circumstance as well, right? Bourgeois family, right? They are other bourgeois people, because that's the consequence they find themselves in. And then they can pick and choose from a few different people, just like the factory worker can pick and choose their friends among the other factory workers. I don't know. The bourgeois family will vanish as a matter of course when its complement vanishes, and both will vanish with the vanishing of capital. I have no idea what the fuck the text is talking about anymore. It's completely lost me. Do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? To this crime we pled guilty. But you say we destroy the most hallowed of relations when we replace home education by social? Oh, that's interesting. I would say this has happened, right? I don't like this word. But I think, like, if we have one negative consequence of, right, one negative thing I find in society today is the parent-children relationship. Right? That relationship is not valued by society, but when we study psychology, that's like that's the most important relationship. That is the most important relationship for any human being. That is the relationship that informs the most of what will happen throughout your life, right? If you have terrible parents, then you will be a sucky person, right? Right? If you have parents that treat you like shit, then statistically, right, you will have a shit life and you will treat other people like shit. Statistically. It doesn't have to go that way, but it often does. Right? That how you become as a human is mostly dependent on what your parents do to you, right? And there, like, there's a lot of talk about what's he called? Bowlby? The attachment theory, right? It has great value, right? Right? Replacing parents with schools is a mistake. I want parents to come along in the school, right? I think replace is a mistake here. And I think society has been trying to do this for a long while, right? And that's right. That's not neither communist or capitalist. That's just for the sake of efficiency. Well, so I guess that's interesting. How I would look at this school replacement, right? It is making the parent into a wage labor instead of staying a parent, right? So I would say this is a consequence of, like, one of the problematic consequences of consumerism. But the communists arguing for a social education, which, I mean, social education is fine, but don't replace, enhance. Yeah, take the parents to the school with the children and help the parents become the best teachers they can be, and have formal teachers, right, work together with the parents and teach the children this and that. And your education is not that also social, determined by social conditions under which you educate, by the intervention, direct or indirect, of society by means of schools, etc.? Yeah, exactly. The communists have not invented the intervention of society in education. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking. They do but seek to alter the character of that intervention and to rescue education from the influence of the ruling class. I'm actually all for this.
Something right, something everybody else in history has done wrong.
What, like eat the food, drink the water, and breathe the air?
Like, empower the individual, like, and that is what is happening slowly. Like, school is very slow to evolve and improve and change, right? But the changes that we are seeing is kind of that it becomes slowly more and more individually focused, right? So the teaching is about the child, right? What should we teach the child? What is the child's aptitudes and interests? That becomes more and more the focus, instead of, right? That's not social education. That's individualistic education, I would say, right? Social education is more, what does society need? And we educate people into those needs, right? That's the influence of the ruling class. And that is still like a big deal, but it starts to become more and more, right, diversified, individualized, right? You can go into STEM, you can go into humanistics, you can go into what's that? Right, where you learn a trade, right? You can become a car mechanic through school, right? And then, right, and that is more, you get more and more choice. It's more and more about what the child wants rather than what society needs. And I like rescue education from the influence, that's kind of dumb, right? Society has some needs that needs to be fulfilled, right? You have to know a little bit of math to be a member of society. Right? Well, no. There is a little bit of maths required for your existence as a member of society. You don't have to know it, but society believes, right, that's the ruling class, believes that you should be able to do some maths. And I think that is a valid influence from the ruling class, right? From a top-down perspective, right? Reading, writing, counting, doing a little bit of maths. I would say even some ethics I would want to learn, right? From the top, because that is to be independent, to be an independent individual. There is some knowledge that kind of is required, that is needed to empower the individual to such a degree. That's one way of looking at this, right? The bourgeois claptrap about the family and education, about the hallowed correlation of parents and child, becomes all the more disgusting the more, by the action of modern industry, all the family ties among the proletarians are torn asunder, their children transformed into simple articles of commerce and instruments of labor. Yeah, that's why we read the modest proposal, right? Because yeah, this sucks, right? Tearing families asunder. Yeah, I don't think that this is a claptrap, and I don't like the word hallowed, but I think that, yeah, there's a correlation between parents and child, and we want to keep that. As a political statement, or like a personal statement, right, for the bourgeois to say that, right? Sure, it's unfair. It's super unfair, I'll give you that, but it also makes sense. Just like I would say for the proletarians, it makes a lot of sense that they don't want to commercialize their children, right? Most parents want their best for their children. That is just how it works. But you, communists, would introduce community of women, screams the bourgeois in the chorus. Wait, in chorus? Community of women? What do you mean? The bourgeois sees a wife as a mere instrument of production. He hears that the instrument of production are to be exploited in common, and naturally can come to no other conclusion that the lot of being common to all will likewise fall to the women. This is a straw man. The bourgeois sees a wife as a mere instrument of production. I've read like old text from these times, right? There's so much romance going on. Romancing between bourgeois and bourgeois, right? There's a very intricate dating period and whatnot. Sure, it's a little bit production, right? It's marrying two families together to keep the business going, right? That's what kings and queens did, right? To get alliances working. Then we have like Romeo and Juliet and stuff like that. It's all about, yeah, the mere instrument of production. That's not, I don't know. He has not even suspicion that the real point aimed at is to do away with the status of women as mere instruments of production. Yeah, I would be all for that, right? people as a means to an end, I'm all for getting rid of that. Yeah, that's the goal. Less slavery. Yeah, less slavery. I'm all for less slavery, no matter what it looks like. Means of production. Oof. Alright, I think since I just got to a new page and I'm a little bit tired, I think this is lunchtime. Huh? This is lunchtime indeed. So thanks for hanging out, and see you in the next time. Cheers.